Hi booktube, Aaron here. Hope you're doing very well. Today I'll be responding to a bit of a discussion that's been floating around here on booktube. A few weeks ago, I think Steve Donahue created a video sort of asking sort of all of us, anyone who makes or watches booktube videos, he was asking how do we choose what our next books will be. He's a very nosy person, and he loves asking those kind of questions. And so far, in terms of video makers, I've seen two people chime in and give a response. And please let me know if there are any others that I've missed somehow. The first I saw was from Gareth from Books, Songs and Other Magic. And then just recently, Heather from Heather Reads also responded. I really enjoyed both of their responses, so I'll leave links to um, all three videos that I mentioned below. And it's the kind of question I love thinking about. Just recently, I made the Read Smart tag. I made my response to that. Questions about reading discipline, about focusing on books, and so while I was in this sort of zone of just thinking about general reading habits, the kind of questions I just love asking myself all the time. I thought I'd go in and look at this other area of reading, all around picking books, around recommendations and things like that. So I think it sort of splits up into two questions. There's a question, the main question, how do you pick up your next book? And then there's also a question about where do you get your recommendations from as well, which seems like a kind of coda to that first question. And I've split this first question of how do I pick my next book. That there's sort of three topics, three areas that I'll try and discuss. So the first is the question of mood reading. The more I hear people talk about mood reading, the firstly the less I think I understand what it might actually be. For a long time, I thought it was, in a way, kind of what I am, which is, when it comes to choosing a book, just seeing what book stands out the most to you. What book am I in the mood for right now? I'll pick that. I'll read it. It seems to be more and more that there are, I don't know, sort of some stronger elements of mood reading. It might be that you're more prone to putting books down because you're not in the mood for them, and that's definitely something I don't do. I very rarely do that. It might also be that you're trying out multiple books to see which one you're in the mood for, and I don't do that either. And so the more I think about it, the more I think the more I realise I'm not a mood reader, and yet I am sort of pulled by curiosity, and I think that curiosity can overpower my mood if it's in most cases. There is the area, and it's something that Steve touched on, I think, when he did it, which is the idea of maybe you're reading a lot of books with a certain tone, maybe they're quite heavy books, quite depressing books, and you just need books as a sort of that are a little bit lighter, as a bit of a pick me up. And I've definitely been there. And again, I'm not sure whether that fits into being a mood reader or not, or whether it just comes around to being, I don't know, someone who's just aware of their emotions. I'm not entirely sure, but that's something I do. But I don't think I'm a mood reader, so I don't think my mood has that much of an effect on what I pick up and what I might put down. I don't put books down very much. The second thing I've written down here, I've kind of touched on, is my shelves, and this seems like the most obvious thing, but when I'm deciding what book to read, often I just have a look around my shelves, either the ones behind me or other bookshelves downstairs, and I just see what stands out. And I suppose in a way I've already, if a book's already here, it's kind of part of a sort of curation process, and I think that'll be something that we sort of get into with the recommendations. Um, most of the books that are here because I'm interested in them, and so that there aren't really books here that I don't want to read, and at least books that are mine that I don't want to read. And so every book is a contender, whether it's for a first time read or for a reread. And so that 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 browsing of my shelves is, and then just picking up the book that stands out. That sort of process is really how I choose most of the books that I read. And I think something that sort of shapes my reading plans is, um, I think even while I'm reading another book, I'm still looking at, obviously I have books all over the house, and so I'm still looking around the bookshelves and sort of making mental notes of what books I might want to read. And again, that shapes out then my future reading plans, or at least potentially can. Um, and then that sort of segues into the idea of giving myself reading goals, reading plans, and reading projects. I suppose reading goals and plans are kind of interchangeable. But certainly since having a booktube channel, um, I think, at least for me, the kind of bread and butter of my channel are the monthly wrap-ups that I make, where I just tell you about the books that I've been reading that month, and I tell you what books I want to read the next month. Um, when I started making the channel, that really was the kind of thing I wanted to be doing, and it took me a while to get around to how I wanted to do it. Um, but that's essentially what I consider the bread and butter of my booktube channel. And that, I suppose, that element of looking back at the month, seeing what I've read, and then looking forward to books I want to read in a very specific amount of time, wasn't really something I did all that much before having a booktube channel. So it has kind of changed um, my, I don't know, I suppose my reading habits, the way I pick my books. It has changed that significantly, which is quite interesting. And so setting those reading goals, those reading plans for a particular month, even if I don't stick to all of them, it's always a kind of rough. There'll be like 4 or 5 books that I want to read, and it might turn out I only read 2 or 3 of those books, and that something else comes up that I want to read. That quite often happens. Um, but often also those books I don't read, they often keep coming up, and they can keep coming up for quite a long amount of time before I actually get to them. But the fact I keep bringing them up, it holds them in my attention. I have that mental note in the back of my head that this really is a book I want to get to. And so that's one of the ways I choose my next book, if that makes any sense. And then there's also the reading projects as well. And I've sort of separated that off a bit, because they are things that I set for myself sometimes. They're not always that big. Sometimes, they're quite odd. But for example, at the moment, I'm sort of in the middle of reading The Divine Comedy by Dante. Last August, I started Inferno, and then I finished Purgatory, I think in January of this year. And then I kind of put a pause to it because there was a lot going on. We had a baby in March, and Paradiso is, I think, really the most complicated and definitely the weirdest part of the Divine Comedy. The last time I read it, I can remember being really moved by it, but having absolutely no idea what was going on. And so I wanted to give it a lot of attention. So I put that reading project on hold. And I often have these kind of reading projects where there's a specific, sort of quite long and particular body of work, like the Divine Comedy, like Karl Ove Knausgaard's My Struggle, which I've started the first book, and I'm hoping to actually get through the rest of it soon. And things like that, where I'm just systematically going through a certain body of work. And then also it might be a certain author. So I've been building up a collection of books by Thomas Mann because I read The Magic Mountain and I realised that um, he's an author I really love. The Magic Mountain has become one of my favourite novels, if not my favourite novel. And so I want to read as much of him as I can. So that's another reading project that I'm slowly gearing up to, and I'm hoping to get started on soon. And so they're going to be very present in my mind when I'm thinking of what books I want to read, because I'm sort of looking further into the future because I'm not going to be able to finish them all in 1 month. It's going to be, with my struggle and with Thomas Mann, it might be a year or more before I've finished all of those books that I've got ready. But each time I finish one, then the next one will be in the forefront of my mind, and I'll be sort of thinking seriously whether or not I'll be able to fit it into the next book, the next month or the next week or whatever. And so they're definitely a very important part of sort of how I plan out my reading. And as I suggested when I was talking about the monthly wrap ups and when I go through my reading plans, they're always very loose and I'm not too strict with myself. So if it turns out to be a busier month, if it turns out that another book, I don't know, sort of strikes my attention, then I'm happy to change it up. And the fact that I keep doing that again, it has got me questioning whether I am a mood reader or not. But as I said, I think the more I think about it, the more I realise I'm probably not. I'm maybe bordering on it. So I hope that made some kind of sense. That's how I choose my next book. I don't think it's much of a mood reading thing, but it's mainly perusing my shelves, making mental notes of certain books that stand out to me, and then I set these sort of monthly reading plans, and I have these ongoing reading projects, whether it's one particular work or whether it's sort of more general to do with exploring a certain author. So that's generally the things that decide which book I'll be picking up next or will be picking up soon. And then the next area is, where do I get my recommendations? Or I reworded it for myself. How do I hear about the books I might want to read? Simply because with some of the things I'm talking about, I suppose I wasn't even looking for recommendations with some of them, and yet they have impacted what I read. And so, particularly the first couple. So the first one is family. From growing up in a house where both my parents were readers, they read a variety of things. My younger sister was well, still is a voracious reader as well. And so there were lots of authors coming up, lots of books on the shelves where I was kind of familiar with their titles, and then through conversations with my dad, with my sister, or I would that they'd be talking about what they've been reading, or if I was showing some kind of interest in something, they might talk about it. And so I'd have a rough idea about who the Brontes were, who Terry Pratchett is, who Dante was, who William Blake was, or could be anything. And that sort of stays in the back of my head, so that when I'm perusing a library or a bookshop or something, I'm not going in totally blind, because I've got a rough idea from these conversations that I've had with family, and they still go on, um, even if it's about an author that I already know, I've already read. I still have these conversations with the family, and it inspires me to pick them up again, to reconsider them, to try another book by them. And so that has had a big impact on which books I pick up, and you can kind of see it as a kind of recommendation. And the other one that is, less of a solid recommendation is education, about just through English classes at school, hearing about all these authors, and then at university as well. Um, you're just getting all this information is just being thrown at you, and being a good student, I read the stuff that I'm supposed to read for the course, but there might be all kinds of other things that are mentioned, either other students or are mentioned in the books that you're reading, or your lecturer just sort of off, just references kind of offhand, and they stuck with me as well. There might be writers that I just read a slim sampling of. So when I was doing my A levels in college, I read just a slim sampling of some of the Romantic poets, and I've gone on and read more of them. I read a slim sampling of just one story by Angela Carter from The Bloody Chamber, and then I've gone on and I've read all of The Bloody Chamber, and I've read some of her novels, and it's it goes on from there. I read a Borges story first at university, and then went off and read the rest of his short stories. I encountered Joseph Conrad just through one short story at university, and again, then he was a name in the back of my head that I'll be looking out for when thinking of what books to pick up and what books to read next. And so in a way, a lot of my reading is sort of catching up with all of this stuff that's just been thrown at me from uh, from my family and from education, and just from I think it's what I just call sort of cultural osmosis. There's just all this stuff out there that people are talking about, and I'm just trying to catch up, really. Um, Sort of similar to that, then there's the media. There's radio, there's podcasts, and TV. And again, like with education, like with talking with family, all kinds of things are often mentioned, and sometimes things stick. Um, a big thing that's got me interested in quite a lot of books, and is a radio show on the BBC called In Our Time. I think you can listen to it on Spotify, um, and it's just a great little. I think it's about an hour long, maybe 40 minutes long, and there'll just be a small panel of academics, and the presenter Melvin Bragg will just be asking them questions, and you'll be exploring that subject. So there was a great episode a few years ago that I loved about cephalopods, and again about the I don't know the moons of Jupiter, or I don't know, so it could be scientific, it could be about the evolution of crocodiles, it could be about Isaac Newton, or it could be about the Paris Commune, or all kinds of historical things. But also there's literature as well, and so there are episodes on. Um, I think there's one on Death in Venice by Thomas Mann. There's one on Crime and Punishment, on Kafka, on well, just all kinds of writers, and so quite often, if I'm kind of familiar with that writer, but don't, or I've heard the name before, but I don't know much about them, if I see it come up on that program, I quite often listen to it, and it gives me a good idea of whether that's something I'd want to read about or not. And again, when it comes to non-fiction, when it comes to those scientific things, and particularly the historical things, that's been really helpful as well. It can kind of give me a grounding in the in particular subjects that I might be reading about, and it might inspire me to pick up certain non-fiction books as well. And there are two more really quite important places where I get my recommendations, and I think these are really the two main places at the moment. The first one, kind of obviously, is booktube, and there are just so many ways that I've got recommendations, and I've become more and more interested in authors through booktube. I suppose the most immediate, the most obvious way you would think of would be through somebody making a video about a certain book or mentioning certain books in videos, like a tag video or something. And particularly when I first found booktube, I suppose that was what I was looking for. I was looking for people talking about books, and particularly books I don't really know, sometimes books I haven't heard of. And I was kind of looking for recommendations. I was, um, I suppose, becoming quite bored with the confines that I've been reading in, not really knowing where to go next. And so it was quite a wonderful thing then to find this community where there's such a broad um, variety of readers, and suddenly so many things opened up. I was able to work out which of these authors I'd kind of heard of that I might actually want to read, and then lots of other writers that I'd never heard of, as well. So that's been a lot of fun, but also through comments as well, and people bringing up books. Yeah, I don't know. There are so many books that have come up through the comments. I mean, I think I first heard of the Magic Mountain, or I think it was quite there was a bit of synchronicity going on where it come up in some of the things I was reading, but then also people were talking about it in videos, and then also people were mentioning it in comments as well, and I was just becoming more and more and more intrigued by it, and so yeah, there's probably a lot of a lot of the books you can see behind me are here, because of BookTube, because I've been made um, just more and more curious through watching people's videos and through conversing with people, and also I suppose um, BookTube events as well, that they have a huge impact, and they're in the back of my head when I'm choosing what I'm going to read next. There's Historathon, and so when I'm choosing a history book, I like to try and line it up with the quarters they have, so they read different periods in different parts of the year. So that certainly affects which history books I might read, and you know that there are all sorts of other booktube events that turn up through the year, and you know, buddy reading as well. Um, and so suddenly, I don't know that it forces me to be disciplined. I suppose I have to make a very particular choice. You know, so if I'm doing a buddy read, that book's a little more set in stone, um, and it also opens things up as well. As I said, there are so many people offering recommendations. If it's a booktube event, there will be other people participating in that event, reading other books for it, and so there'll be these sort of threads of connection between what you're reading and what they're reading, and so already you're kind of getting recommendations as well. And then the other way I get recommendations, and this is my favourite way, and I've got a few books to show you to sort of give an example, is other books. And I think just books, talking about other books is just one of my favourite ways of discovering new books and working out which books I want to read in the future. So, for example, Red Comet, the short life and blazing art of Sylvia Plath by Heather Clark, a wonderful biography of Sylvia Plath. And one of my favourite sections of this is that there's a chapter about when she was at high school, and there was an English teacher, and she was sort of part of a kind of a special, I don't know, kind of reading club that English teacher had, and he was sort of getting them to read all of these just really great books, as part of that, and then when she was at university as well, sort of seeing what books she was really interested by, what kind of books she was reading, and writing essays about what books were having an impact on her. I really, really loved that. This was one of the places where I first heard of the Magic Mountain, and there was the Double by Dostoevsky came up in here. Haven't read that yet, but I have it and became interested in it, particularly through this. And so this is one book where, through the life of another person, through what they were interested in, I've found all of these reading recommendations. In a similar way, the next couple of books, there's Underland by Robert Macfarlane, which is more of a sort of nature book. It's about humanity's relationship with subterranean spaces, and yet, Robert Macfarlane, being a reader, he's often going to bring up literary references. So particularly Borges and Sir Thomas Browne and probably W.G. Sebald and all kinds of other people turn up. And so as I was reading it, I was sort of enjoying flicking back to the index and just seeing which other writers he was going to bring up. And again, that encouraged me to read more of those writers. There are books like this, How to Read and Why by Harold Bloom. Not often with Harold Bloom, his I don't think the titles of his books always reflect the book you're about to read. But this is essentially about the books and the authors that matter to him and why he rereads them. And Harold Bloom has a terrible habit of spoiling books. He will just go through the plot of a book, so it's something to watch out for. But again, this, often I'll have read his essay about the book, had it spoiled for me, and then I'll probably just forget about it. But it's helped me decide, is Moby Dick a book that I want to read? Is Don Quixote a book I want to read? Do I want to read more poetry by William Wordsworth or Hart Crane? There's stuff in here about Turgenev and Anton Chekhov, and what else do we have? There are lots of Shakespeare plays and sonnets in here. There's Emma by Jane Austen. There's Crime and Punishment, Portrait of a Lady, As I Lay Dying, Blood Meridian, Song of Solomon. And yeah, it just gives me an idea of, even if it has kind of been spoiled for me, I'll probably have forgotten it by the time of getting around to it. But it gives me an idea of before I just pick it up blind. And I suppose that's the thing. I don't often pick up a book totally blind. I will have heard at least a little bit about it, whether through a book, whether through booktube, whether through a podcast or a radio program, whether through a conversation. And I don't mind that at all. I've got Borges here as well. He's also always filled with literary references to Cervantes and Sir Thomas Browne, and he's got a friend, a real life friend, who makes it into some of his stories, called Adolfo Bioy Casares. Apologies for the terrible pronunciation, but he was a writer too, and I became interested in his writing through reading Borges. So I've read one book by him. I'll have to see what else is by him as well, available in English. But I think that's it. That they're all the ways I decide what to read, all the ways I get recommendations. So maybe I'll do a quick retrospect, because it has been a bit formless, I think. So I've decided that I'm probably not a mood reader, but I am drawn to certain books, and I'm quite happy to change plans that I have based on that pull, that curiosity. I think curiosity is the big word for me when it comes to deciding what to read. And yeah, essentially, I was going to say something else, but I don't think it makes sense. I'm always looking through my shelves, and just sort of making mental notes of books I might want to read soon, kind of shifting the books, I suppose, and sorting them in my brain. And then I set up reading goals. I take on these reading projects, and sort of make these long-term plans that are loose, can change, but they give a kind of structure, and they will impact in some way what I choose what to read next. And then I get most of my recommendations. There's family and education, there's the media generally, just references in films, TV, radio, podcasts, and then the big two, there's booktube videos, booktube comments, uh, buddy reads, group reads, and things like that. And then there's also then the conversation between one book and an infinity of other books. So I hope this has been interesting. Again, that is the kind of question I love thinking about. And as I said, my thoughts aren't completely settled on it. It's always changing. I'm not entirely sure about all of it, but I hope it's been interesting. And I'd be very curious to know how you pick your next book. It would be great if if you thought that the way I pick my next book is really odd because you just do it in a completely different way. Then it would be great to hear, whether in the comments or in your own video. So for now, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.